Hello and welcome to the Second Wind Academy podcast, the show all about career transition from the perspective of elite athletes. Today's guest is Kari Mills. She's a former college and professional softball athlete who has seamlessly transitioned her skills from the sports arena to the business world. Currently, she serves as the head of on-demand content at Life Fitness, where she oversees the research, development, and commercialization of video content featured on Life Fitness apps and cardio equipment worldwide. Now, importantly and additionally, Kari is the founder of Sweat Marketing Lab, a venture close to her heart and mine. The mission is simple: to empower female athletes with the knowledge and tools needed to build their brand, tell their stories, and earn what they deserve, both inside and outside of their sport. This is a great show. Check it out. Kari, thank you for joining me today. Really glad to have you on the show.
Yes, thank you for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Great. Well, I'm glad you are because, as we were chatting earlier and as I've been watching a lot of what you've done, it's really struck me about how what you're doing today is really about supporting athletes, leveraging their brand, leveraging themselves and what they're achieving, which is very much what here at Second Wind Academy we're all about. So I'm looking forward to delving into that a little bit more, and also, essentially what got you there.
Yeah.
So look, let's kick in. So tell me, what is it you're up to today?
Yeah. So currently, there's a couple of things that I'm doing. I lead on-demand content for Life Fitness, which is a global equipment manufacturer. We're found in gyms around the world. I specifically work on the on-demand instructor-led content that is on our cardio equipment. So think of kind of like Peloton, people are familiar with, but our equipment's found in commercial gyms like David Lloyd, Equinox, Planet Fitness, that sort of thing. So that's one piece of it. And then I also have a side business called Sweat Marketing Lab, where I help. We're really focused on female athletes, but we could help anybody marketing and telling their stories in order to find the right partnerships and brand deals to help them get paid and kind of make the most of who they are before, during, and after their athletic career.
That is great. I love both of those different goals, but I'm loving that link between, certainly about athletes, that female athlete piece as well. You're talking about from a brand and content. Did you find that there's or what problem did you find there when you started speaking to athletes to inspire to launch that?
So I guess to give a little bit on my background, I played college and professional softball and then went on to manage fitness clubs and then eventually ended up working for Gatorade in sports marketing. So kind of having the background of understanding what it takes to be an athlete. And there's something really special about that. The stories they have to tell, all of those things from just the athlete side, and then working for Gatorade on the marketing and sports marketing side and understanding the power and the excitement of athletes and how you bring those stories to life. So as I've continued to just kind of watch sports evolve, I've gotten really excited about the opportunities specifically for female athletes because it's changed a lot since I was in the game. More people are watching the game. Athletes are kind of stepping up and using their voices in a way that they haven't in the past. And I think it's just a really powerful and exciting thing, especially for women who, maybe in my case, I just looked at sports as something that I was passionate about. I was competitive. I love to do it. But to think that I could get paid enough to live a sustainable lifestyle, right? Like not eating cereal 3 meals a day and just doing it because you loved it was awesome and a big thing, right? I think the men have been able to dream these big dreams, but as a female athlete, we've approached it a little bit different. And so, both on the men's and women's side, as social media and marketing is changing, there's a ton of opportunities out there. So it's really exciting, and a space that I'm really passionate about.
Right. The bit that I sort of latch on there is, you speak about your lived experience as a student or college and then a professional athlete. And during that time, and since you see this change in social media, in, I guess, physical presence, bums on seats, watching games,
Yeah.
and how that has evolved. So before then we step into, going through that and how how you see athletes making that change. You mentioned a whole host of different roles that you have been able to do. So I'm keen to just step back a little bit and understand, just give me that summary a bit of, playing in college and then how do you turn pro? And then we can start touching on how did that set you up for what you've done afterwards?
Yeah. So I played college softball, Division I here in the States. And after that, there were opportunities to go and play overseas in Europe. And so that was something for me. It was like, how long can I just keep living this life and playing, right? It wasn't like I was going to make a lot of money, but I could travel, do a little bit of coaching and that sort of thing. So I did play in Sweden and got to travel a little bit. And so, yeah, it was for me just like, how long can I keep being a kid and playing the sport that I love? And then eventually kind of transitioning, I came back to the States and was a grad assistant and started coaching softball. And so again, it was just like, how close can I stay to this game as long as I can? So I went to grad school, coached softball and got my MBA. And then from there, again, I was like, I've learned some things from being an athlete. I know a lot of people are like, I want to go into corporate America, which I did, but I still had these roots in sports and fitness, and I just loved that. So after grad school, I ended up managing fitness clubs. I still wanted to be around fitness, athletics as much as I could. And I realized that was just sort of in me. So if I could learn the business side of it, that would take me a long way, because one of the things that I had learned is unique to a lot of other people. I understood how athletes moved, what they care about, all of those things that were relevant in a gym setting that maybe other people didn't. And so while I understand a lot of people take their athletic careers and go something completely different, I think what I found is using those tools in leadership and teamwork and just understanding dynamics in athletic spaces was valuable. Next, that's where I transitioned into managing fitness clubs, and then eventually fell into marketing with Gatorade.
So I have to jump in at that point because I mean, that's a great story. And I love the way you say, I fell into marketing at Gatorade. So, so you can have so many people who are listening to this going, okay, so if I just keep going, eventually I'll just fall into it. It will just happen. Now,
okay, well, I knocked on some doors,
okay,
pounded. Yeah, so I guess I could tell you, to give you a little bit of background on that, I was managing fitness clubs, and I learned a ton. It was a very sales-driven business, but I learned a lot. And
what is it about?
Yeah.
What was it then? So even moving towards managing clubs is you being there in the gym, training people, understanding, being good at that. But you mentioned it's also a bit of a sales environment, to me, which then suddenly I'm thinking, Mad Men, this sort of, okay, you got to sell this, we've got to do that. Is that what it was like to you, or did you find it
a little bit, right? So there
else?
was a little bit of a balancing game. So there's a scoreboard, which I was like, okay, I can do this. I like scoreboards. And then there's the people, teamwork, leadership dynamic. So I was managing fitness staff, which I understood, right? Kind of their coaches, if you will. So I understood them. And then I was managing salespeople and selling myself. and they're very numbers driven, right? And so it was sort of the scoreboard and understanding what motivates people, and bringing that to the table in managing fitness clubs. One thing about athletics is it's sort of there's a lot of emotions and things that happen, especially in the heat of the moment. So if you can learn how to work with some of those dynamics, it comes pretty natural. It's not ever easy, but you have a leg up, is what I'd say when it comes to leading teams.
Yeah, and as you were going through then that mix then from leading a team on, I can still say a diamond. So you were leading people, out on the team. You had that experience as a coach. Were you consciously linking the two between, okay, so I've coached out on the field before, I can coach inside a gym. It's the same thing. To what extent did you go through those steps as well?
Looking back, I didn't. But what I realized is other people are like, oh, she's comfortable in this setting. And they were a little bit surprised, but I wasn't afraid to speak up when I needed to, those sort of things. And so I guess if I could go back and tell my younger self something, it's like, no, don't undermine what you know. Like, you've trained for this. And I think that's something that maybe gets lost a little bit in athletes. Well, all I've done is played sports. Like, yes, there are some things that you need to learn technically, just like anything, but you are bringing a lot to the table. And I think sometimes it's hard to recognize that when that's just what you've done and it's been fun. So yeah, it wasn't conscious at the time, but looking back, I had been training for it. I just didn't realize it.
Yeah, that's so true. It is that realization often hits in much later. Look back, hey, that wasn't as hard as it was supposed to be. I wonder why that was. It certainly demonstrates that need to pause and reflect in some way. Now, you spoke then about how you got that shift into marketing, into Gatorade. Just talk us through that. What was that door knocking experience like for you?
Yeah. So I guess thinking about sort of like what's the dream job, the dream career for me. I grew up in Oregon, which is home of Nike, for those who don't know. And so I had a really unique lens of like seeing kind of the best sports brand, perhaps in the world, right? Kind of like that came from here. So I'd always had like these aspirations and kind of just like dream of working in sports marketing, because I just saw it as an athlete, how cool it was, the storytelling, all of those things. I didn't know exactly how I was going to get there. But sort of like playing sports, I was like, you know what? I think if I knock on enough doors, ask enough questions, and just kind of continue to be persistent. So as I was managing fitness clubs, Gatorade came out with a fitness line at the time. It was called G-Fit. It's now Propel, if anyone's familiar with that product. But they were looking for people who could sell Gatorade products and market them. And they wanted people that could walk the walk and talk the talk, both in the fitness and sports realm. And I was like, well, yeah, like I can do that, right? So they were opening up new markets, and there was a guy that came into the gym that he played baseball, and he had been one of the first people that they'd hired. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, what do I have to do? Sort of thing. And so went through the interview process and ended up getting a position. And they were hiring athletes because it was people that understood the brand. They could talk about it in a really compelling way that was credible, and they believed in the product because they probably used it themselves, right? So it was, what I guess I'd say is it wasn't an accident. I knew what I wanted, and I was really intentional in starting to network, talk to those people. And it wasn't like I landed that job immediately, but I'd put in the groundwork and done a good job at any role that I'd been in, to the point where people could be like, oh, hey, this girl I think would be good for that job. So that's sort of how that started.
That's great. And thank you for breaking it down as well. It does make it a bit more, it makes it a bit more realistic or tangible, because like you say, you were influenced by one of the biggest brands in the world. and certainly for any athlete out there, one of those aspirational ones to wear, to then work for, to be, I'll just say, to be part of.
Right.
And so I love the way that inspired you and sort of helped you even, you know, spot this opportunity. As luck would happen,
Sure.
someone walks into the gym, but as luck would happen, you were ready for that opportunity, and
Right.
you
I
were
knew what
able
I
to
was
make the
looking
most of
for.
it. Yeah,
Yeah. And
that's
I was
it.
willing to say no to other things, is what I'd say too, because there could have probably been other higher paying jobs that I could have gotten. But for me, that was kind of my true north. And I knew that. So I guess that's one thing I'd say is being an athlete, like it was important for me to stay close to that space.
And say no to things. That's kind of brave.
It is.
Do you recall what you said no to?
There were other like corporate wellness, health type jobs, which were for a great cause and, like things that a lot of people would love. But for me, that just wasn't it. So yeah, there were a number of opportunities. And I think a lot of people, especially since I'd gone and gotten my master's degree, like it felt like sometimes I wasn't necessarily using it, right? So maybe I was
Yeah.
taking a longer, less traveled path than maybe my parents or other people would have recommended. Like take the security, right? Like, but for me, I just knew kind of what got me excited, and it wasn't necessarily sitting in a cube in corporate America. So I know some people that's amazing for that wasn't me.
I love the way you described, you had this true north and you were able to find
Hmm.
that. And whilst you had these influences from, your network, your community around you, loved ones
Hmm.
who wanted the best for you were able to stay true to, to an extent to what you believed in and to where you really
Sure.
wanted to be and make that happen. So going through that phase, what sort of support did you have to be able to understand what your true north was and feel confident enough to spot it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think it's something that has always evolved. But for me, I just always, even now, like I love competing. I'm a competitor. I love being around the magic that is sports. I love walking into a stadium and knowing it's a close game without knowing the score because you can just feel the
Brilliant.
energy.
Yeah.
So for me, like it was like those moments that I'm like, the thing that I could talk about nonstop and get so excited about, right? Like, I don't know if you guys follow Gary Vee, but he'll say, what would you do if no one was paying you? You know what your passion is, right? And so for me, I was like, I love sports. I love watching like the stories behind the athletes, like all of those things, what makes them tick. And so I think it's just like I knew for me and I wasn't willing to sacrifice that. And so um, I think most people know. They just might be afraid of what other people think, is what I'd say.
Yeah. Yeah, very true. What was, so thinking about your time, coming out of the game, coming out of softball, and how did success or how did the definition of success change for you?
Mhm. Yeah. So I think, the thing, one of the things that was hardest for me is in softball, there are rules and I know exactly what to expect and I know how to win. Like it's really black and white. Like I put in the time, I put in the effort. Um, but in the real world, there are other things that happen, right? There are politics, there are all of these dynamics, and you're not just working with athletes. So I think that is one of the hardest adjustments for me, right? So as an athlete, you're very single focused on the goal at hand, and everything around you supports that. And that's it, right?
Yeah.
Once you start to get into corporate America, like, I mean, you could live your life like that, but you might be kind of a jerk. And there are other things that are that matter, right? And you
Yeah.
might not just walk in and be the big dog on campus. That's just not how it works. And so having the emotional intelligence, kind of starting to just learn how this new game is played, I think is one of the most important thing. And finding mentors and people that want to help you along the way. Because again, I think as an athlete, you walk in with some really special qualities, but there are other places that need to be developed. And so it's important to find those people that can help you the same way you had a coach help you be a good athlete. I think that's just something that needs to happen.
Yeah. Great. Thank you for that. Thank you. So when you're looking, just understanding again, so you at Gatorade, you found your place, you were in the right environment. How did you know you were in that environment? How did you know you were there and you thought, hey, I've made a good decision here? What fear did you have that you were in the wrong spot?
Oh, can you repeat that question? You cut out a little bit.
I did it on purpose to try and make you feel more anxious about what it was. I'm kidding.
It worked.
When you're in Gatorade, how did you know you were in the right spot? What is it that reaffirmed to you, phew, this was the right decision. I'm going to be successful.
Yeah. So I think there's a couple of things. I worked with some really smart people that it was important for me to work with people who were smarter than me that I could learn from. And then the other thing I would say is I found myself in just like some sort of like pinch me moments, right? Like, oh, is that Usain Bolt in the elevator? And is that Serena Williams in the conference room, right? Like just things like that I was like, are you kidding me? And so those things were like, where else do I want to go? So for me, it was those things that were just being surrounded by or exposed to some of the greatest athletes in the world, I think was just cool. And then understanding the storytelling, the art, and the science of marketing, and really learning from some of the best in the business was really an exciting thing. The other thing that was really cool about working at Gatorade is I was working with a lot of former athletes. And so I was able to work with people that spoke a similar language. We got along because we could relate and we could understand kind of both the business side and then the athletic side, which is really important. So kind of that saying like your vibe attracts your tribe, knowing what you want. And I think that goes back a little bit more to being like, yeah, this is what this is who I am. This is what I do. It made it probably easier for them to be like, yeah, she's a good fit here. I wasn't wavering on like, I don't know. And that was what I'd say. Most of the people that were working on that business were super passionate about what they did. And they wanted to be there.
Yeah, that's interesting because what you've described is you're with a group of people who had a similar passion and a similar goal to yourself, which is very similar to what it was like in sport. So in softball, like you say, hey, we all want to play well, do the right techniques, do the right patterns together, and that will get us to the outcome to win the game or move forward in the series. You found that same or similar fit when you were at work in the corporate realm. So it didn't even feel like it was corporate. It didn't feel like you were doing a lot different, it sounds.
Yeah, I think that's one of the things that has been important for me, that I'm working on things that I'm passionate about, and that was the case there. And I think I'm very privileged to find myself in that situation, right? But yes, I have made a very deliberate choice to work on things that excite me. And, it's not to say that there isn't hard work and there aren't things that I'd rather not do, but for the most part, I found myself in things that excited me.
Yeah. How did you then figure out it was time to do something else?
Yeah. So, if you've worked in corporate America, there are sometimes corporate restructures. And so I had been in three or four different roles at Gatorade. So I'd gotten to learn some different things. But I was a part of a corporate restructure. And so my position was eliminated. And so at that time, it was a little bit like, man, all I've done is be an athlete. And then it was sort of an extension of being an athlete for me, right? And so I was like, well, what would I do? What do I want to do? And so that time after I got laid off, I was like, well, maybe I want to go back to fitness. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing. But the other thing that was probably the best thing that's ever happened to me is I had a chance to do some serious soul searching and say, okay, what's my superpower? Like, what have I learned from being an athlete, from working at Gatorade, all of those things. And that's sort of how Sweat Marketing Lab was born, right? And I was like, I understand athletes and marketing as well, if not better than anyone else. Like, and I started to be like the 10,000 hours to mastery type of thing where like, I was like, no, I just know, I know how they move. I know what excites them, all of those things. And so that was a really pivotal point for me in being like, you know what, I think I can do this. People need this. And I'm going to bet on myself. Right. And so, yeah, that's sort of the ending point of working at Gatorade, but it really propelled me to go into sports marketing in a way that is really authentic to who I am and how I can help other athletes.
Congratulations on being laid off. That was an
Thank you.
absolute pivotal moment for you and those
I
who
say
you're
that now. At the
impacting.
time, I was like,
I say it to so many people when that happens, and
yeah.
it is often a challenge in the time to recognize how being laid off can be an opportunity to find that second wind, to rebirth
Sure.
into
Yeah, it
into
was
something new. And I love the way how you took that time, or you were able to take some time to reflect and to think about yourself. How did you do that?
Well, I had a lot of time on my hands all of a sudden, right? And so I read a lot. I did the things I had a severance package, so I had some time. And I was going through job interviews. There was a lot of rejection, and sometimes I found myself being like, I know the answer they want to hear, but I don't really love Excel spreadsheets, like, right? So I was like, what do I love? And I can give you kind of the BS interview answer, but for me, I just started going back again. Okay, what is my true north? What are the things that I love? And one of the books that I actually read that really inspired me was Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, the founder of Nike. I know a lot of people have read
Yeah.
this book and may not have responded in the same way. I think for me, being from Oregon and saying, how in the world did this guy build this empire coming from like small town Oregon, like where I grew up? And it was such a just like inspiring message that like he didn't set out to do what he accomplished, but he said, I'm going to start. And he like had this kind of fire in his belly. And so that was one of the books that was just really empowering for me to be like, what if I just kind of bet on myself? Like, let's just see what happens here. And so it was like, I'm not going to do this overnight, but I'm going to start and I'm just going to keep doing it. I'll find coaches, mentors, the same way I learned a sport, right? And like one of the things that I also took away from that book is one, he knew exactly where he wanted to go. And two, he didn't surround himself with anybody who told him he couldn't, like, which was very eye-opening to me, from his wife to, and like, right, because he's got big dreams. And if you're not in, it was like, all right, not fine, but you're not my people. And so that was like where I was like, oh, he set himself up like an athlete would for this is where I'm going and that sort of thing. So anyway, I say that to say, for me, it was reading, it was listening to podcasts, all of those things, doing soul searching meditation and being like, all right, what do you want to get out of bed and do every morning that you're willing to commit to? And so it was sports marketing, and female athletes, just because of my background, are really important for me, but athletes in general.
That's great. And even you saying that inspires me. Oddly enough, I'm listening to you, and as someone who's interviewing you, I know my next response should be based very much on what you have said. But I'm listening to it and I'm thinking, I love the fact that you read a book, you heard the story of someone else, and that has inspired you to begin the journey that you are on right now.
Yeah.
And that's really what this interview is about. That's what this whole podcast series is about,
Yeah.
is hearing these stories of others so that you go, wow, they're like me. I can do that. I can begin today. I should go ahead and do that.
Yeah, and I think the thing, and I love that you're doing this, is the more that you can kind of find in common with that person, right? The more you're like, oh, I can really do this. They're not that different from me. And I think sometimes, like, someone that looks at Phil Knight or whatever is like, where did he come from? Who are his parents? And I was like, he lived down the street. How did he do this? Right? Like, he's not that much different. And so I think that was something that I was like, no, it wasn't like he was just born into wealth and all of these things. I was like, no, he saw something. Even when people told him, like, no, he's like, I think I can do this, and kind of just followed his true north. So yeah, I love what you're doing, and I think there's a lot of power in seeing different types of people that have similar backgrounds, geographies, all of those things, because then it becomes a reality. So yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's great. And so, Carrie, today we opened up, and you're really talking about having this. I'm going to say this dual career that you're working through. So you have a role that has a foot in, I'll say, corporate world, and another
Hmm.
a bigger foot
Yeah.
with regard to sweat marketing.
Yeah.
Can you just talk about how you I just I want to say temporally, just from a time perspective, how do you manage that both physically and mentally, working between the
Yeah.
two activities?
Yeah. So fortunately, well, two things. One, I work on East Coast time. And so my days start early for my corporate job. I work remotely. And so then that allows me time on evenings and weekends to put in the time to Sweat Marketing Lab. And a lot of what I've done right now is very digitally and automated so that it can kind of run on its own. I do consulting, events, workshops, but I work them around my job currently. Eventually, I'd like to go fully in on Sweat Marketing Lab, but that's just where I'm at now. The other thing I'd say for me, I needed kind of a creative outlet where I could make my mark. And sometimes it's a little hard in corporate America because, um, again, you're working with a team and there's a vision. And of course, you do get to put your input, but you're working for someone else. So I say that to say it also just, it makes me appreciate my corporate America job a little bit more because I do have a creative outlet somewhere else. So yeah, they balance out nicely.
Yeah, yeah. I think that's so good that you're recognizing that you're able to see how both can play off or support one another. I tell you what is really interesting, and I speak to many people around basically leveraging technology as we step out of COVID, as we step into a world of
Hmm.
a lot more hybrid and remote working, is playing the time zone game. And you've just described that beautifully well. Same country, but saying, hey, well, if I'm working East Coast time and that gives me more hours in my day to be able to do
Hmm.
what I love and to be able to get that
Right.
balance between the two. Still evenings and weekends, still the way these things kick off. And I think that is absolutely
Yeah.
great, but
Yeah.
that hasn't held you back.
No, yeah. And I mean, here's the thing. If you want to do this thing, like if it's important to you, it's really intentional. I put the time in. It's not for everyone. I'm very like you have to be self-motivated if you want to do your own thing, I would say. And that's why it's maybe not for everyone. And but for me, like I figure out a way to make it work because it's important to me.
Yeah. What do you think it is? I mean, you know, open the random question perhaps, but what do you think it
Yeah.
is that makes it, you say it's not for everybody, or like, as an athlete, I guess non-athletes as well, it's how do I make the time for that side hustle? How do I make the time for that passion? What do you think it is that helps us to create the time or find the time? Is it planning? Is it just
Um,
idiocy,
Yeah,
not
I
loving
think probably
sleep.
all of the
What's
above. You're a little crazy, right? Yeah, for sure. It's not for everyone, right? But I think making it fun is really important, and not everything is fun, but like almost like if you want to play a sport, like most people started out as fun and they would find time to do that on the evenings and weekends, right? Because there's something that gets them excited about it. So for me, it's like a little bit of that competitive drive that I'm like, oh, I think I can do this, right? And so then there's a challenge in sort of overcoming it, that sort of thing. And I feel like I'm helping people. So for me, it's sort of like, why are you doing this? And I think one, it's to empower other people. And then two, I just think it makes me kind of level up in everything that I'm doing. And so those are why it's important for me. But I think everyone has to figure that out. Because if it's not important for you and you don't love it, like you're not going to stick to it, which is fine. Again, it's not for everyone. But I do think it's important to spend some time being like, why am I doing this? And sometimes I say like, why can't I just go punch a clock like everyone else, right? Like, and there are moments like that. But for me, like, I know I wouldn't be as satisfied with it. So it's hard work, but it's worth it for me.
Yes, it is. It is worth it, and keep going, because I think the impact that you're making is awesome. And so for those who are now listening and getting super excited with the story, Kari, can you give me a bit more then on, or maybe give me an example, for someone who you're working with through Sweat Marketing Labs and the types of things that you're doing for them?
Yeah. So a lot of what I found is often athletes, they'll say, I want brand partnerships, or they want to get paid. Of course you do, right? But like, what happens, especially on the women's side, a lot of the men will have agents and that sort of thing. But the women don't necessarily have the same resources. And so working with them to say, all right, first of all, who are you? What's your story? What do you stand for? Right. And being able to articulate that. Because if you can't tell me who you are, and then you get in the media, someone else is going to tell your story for you. Right. And that's not what you want. Like, you want to be controlling that narrative. So a lot of it is working with the athletes and saying, all right, who are you and what do you stand for? And then like, what are the brands that you would want to work with? And why would they want to work with you, right? So kind of doing some of those things to start peeling back the layers. The other thing I would say is knowing your value. What we've found is there are a lot of female athletes that will just take brand deals and be like, cool, I'll show this on social media. And I'll be like, well, how much are they paying you? Well, they're just giving you a product or whatever. And they're going to take what you let them get away with, right? But if you say, all right, here's my audience, here's the engagement, and you start to quantify some of those things, like you would as an athlete. What are your stats? Like, what are your marketing stats? And be able to go to the table with that. And, if you're not there yet, start to put a plan in place for like, all right, maybe you're a freshman or whatever. Like, who do you want to be and how are we going to tell your story? And if you think of, whether it's a Serena Williams, a Michael Jordan, LeBron James, these people that have changed the game in a big way, it's because they have stories behind the brands that they're partnering with that people relate to. They're superheroes to them, right? And so just like we were saying earlier about your podcast, same idea, but it's helping tell your stories and get paid for it. So it's really breaking down the details so that you know exactly what to do and how to do it in order to make it a reality.
I love that.
Does that answer your question?
I love the simplicity. Okay. I love the steps.
Yeah.
That sounds great.
Yes.
I think, for those listening, a lot of people will understand the what. They'll understand, I need to go ahead and do those things. And it sounds like through your lived experience, your practical corporate work and experience through there, you can help them to understand how to make that happen.
Right.
And it's no longer just a resolution or something that, hey, I need to get to this, but it is, right. Here I'm going to do is break down those steps for you.
Yeah, it could be something as simple as sending an email. You find a brand manager that works for a brand that you're interested in. They get so many of those emails, right? So if you don't know how to talk to them in a really concise way, you don't get hurt. And that's something, being on the brand side, that I saw, and I was like, man, I'd love to help these. So it's sort of breaking those pieces down so like you can get seen.
Yeah. Listen, Kari, that's brilliant. When you look back, I'll sort of coming to the end of our conversation, really. But
Mhm.
when you look back now at your career and your experiences, what's the one thing that you would perhaps change if you still end up where you are today? What would be that one thing that you would perhaps change in in your life experience?
Man, I don't know if I would change anything because I don't know that I'd be here. And I don't know if that's the answer that you're looking for. I could tell you what I'd change if I was an athlete now in this day and time, as I'd make sure I got brand partnerships. And I'd
Right.
set
Okay.
up my personal and professional brand in a way that, on social media when I transitioned into corporate America or whatever that next thing is, that someone could Google me and be like, I want her to work for me, or that sort of thing, because again, you're disciplined and you are a team leader. All of those things are things that I think are so valuable now that I would do if I was an athlete then, or then if I was an athlete now, to really take advantage of that.
Kari, that's great. I think everyone now should quickly Google themselves and see where they rank and see what it says about themselves too. I
Yes.
think
Yeah.
yeah. And so, look, Kari, just to close off, people are going to want to reach out to you. They're going to want to follow your story, the story of Sweat Marketing Labs. What are the best ways to connect with you and follow your story?
Yeah. So website, sweatmarketinglab.com. We do have a course called From Lab to Launch, where athletes can go through all of those practical steps and have kind of a roadmap for how to reach out to brands, how to find brand partnerships. So that can be found on our website. And then at Sweat Marketing Lab is Instagram. We are going to do a big launch in February and start sharing out even more tips and tricks and all of those things to help people. So you'll be seeing more content there. So yeah, Instagram, website, my email, contact is all on there. But again, everything's at Sweat Marketing Lab.
Kari, that's great. And look, we will put all that information in the show notes as well. So I want to say thank you so much for joining me on the Second Win Academy podcast and sharing your life experience, but also some awesome tips and tools to help others contemplating that transition to life after sport. So thanks very much for sharing today.
Yes, thank you for having me. I love what you're doing, and I'm excited to see where you go as well with this.